Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Thank him? Welcome. Oh, welcome. Well, thank you, and welcome Frank, our leader and speaker for the night. Speaker, I'm the leader. Frank.
Hi everybody, my name's Frank and I'm an alcoholic. I want to thank Andrew for leading the meeting, for speaking, for introducing me. I want to thank my friend John for asking me to come and speak. It's an honor and a privilege to be asked to participate in Alcoholics Anonymous. My sponsor used to tell me that speaking was probably the least significant commitment I could have in AA. And I think what he meant by that was, the commitments. I used to have the food commitment here back in '82 when Rodeo was on Rodeo. What a concept. And those are the commitments that keep you coming back to the same place week after week, especially when you don't want to be there, to be asked to speak, to show up for one night and run my mouth about me for half an hour. I mean, what kind of commitment is that? I can do that. That'll get you drunk, but so it is an honor and a privilege to be asked to do this. I want to welcome the newcomers. I want to say happy birthday to the birthday people. If you're new and you think I'm moving funny, you're seeing things. You just need a drink, No, I kid the newcomer, when that actually happened to me when I was new. My sobriety date is December 20th, 1982. So that's like 26 years. It's a long time between drinks for a drunk like me. I was a blackout drinker. And when I got here, I would have these gnats in my peripheral vision. It was like hallucinations. I mean, they were constantly there, and I didn't know, if they were there or not. And I used to, this was one of my first meetings ever, was Rodeo, to come to Rodeo. And, we used to go out afterwards. I went to noon meetings in West Hollywood at the Architects. And we would go to this coffee shop that had these lampshades that came out of the wall. And I remember I had about 60 days and I was talking to a friend. And, I had these gnats in my peripheral vision. They weren't, I would constantly see things. And while we were talking, this moth comes in and lands on that lampshade, And I was trying to listen to the guy, and he noticed that I saw this moth, and I'm trying not to look at it, and focus on him. He grabs my hand and he says, "Frank, don't worry. It's really there," I cried like a baby, I mean, that was, it was little things like that let me know I was getting better. So if you're new, you're not seeing things. My hand's shaking and I'm moving funny. And it's Parkinson's disease. I was diagnosed with it about 12 years ago. And I like to, point it out because if you are new, you know, if I don't say something, you might, you know, end up watching me dance up here instead of listen to what I have to say. So I want to say it's the least of what's wrong with me. You know, and it's kind of a funny story. When I got diagnosed, I had to go to a neurologist. I had never been to a neurologist before. That was the kind of doctor I had to get to diagnose this, and he didn't know me. I didn't know him. I walked in, and like at this point, I'm about 15 years sober, you know, and I had never met this guy. I went in, he goes, you know, he says, "What's up?" And I said, "Well, my hand moves when I'm not moving it. So why don't you tell me what's up, you know?" And the first question he asked, doesn't know me from Adam, he says, "How does it respond to alcohol?" You know, so I guess what it is my hand needs a drink, you know? I paid $500 for that piece of information. Hell, I could have told him that, you know? So I feel like that old Peter Sellers movie where he had that hand that would attack him, you know? You know, my friend Milton says, "Don't sit next to me when I'm eating soup." So, anyway, it ebbs and flows. You can watch it move or listen to what I have to say. It doesn't really matter. You know, I said earlier that it's an honor and a privilege to be asked to do this. And I mean that. Speaking is an opportunity for me to go back and remember who I was, you know, what I had, how I thought, what I did. I was a useless human being when I got to AA. I lived in a very hostile world. My perception, you know, earlier one of the birthday people said that it was a disease of perception. You know, my perception when I got to AA was that the world was a very hostile place. I was out to get mine before you took it away from me. And I was convinced that you were out to take mine away from me. You know, that kind of perception, that kind of outlook renders one useless. You know, I was terrified. I had nothing to give. And if I had had anything, I wouldn't have been interested in giving it. You know, anything I have that's of any value, any perception I have of who I am, but most especially any use I have on the planet, anything I do for another human being is a result of Alcoholics Anonymous in my life. It's a debt I'll never pay back, and it was given to me. You know, I came to the fellowship. Eventually, the fellowship introduced me to this book up here, this big book, and that book introduced me to these 12 steps. And my sponsor pointed out that the first 11 words of the 12th step are, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. He said it was the only thing I was working on, was this adjustment in perception, you know, a new outlook. And that has happened for me. And like I say, it's an honor and a privilege to be asked to participate. Now, I usually hate speaker meetings, you know, unless I'm the speaker. Then I have a pretty good time. But if you're like me and you hate speaker meetings too, I mean, especially when I was new, I used to sit in the back and I try to melt into the wall. And, you know, like I say, welcome to the newcomers. If you're new and you did not stand up at the beginning of the meeting, that was me. You know, and you're welcome too. And I relate to that. But, you know, I have a story that was given to me indirectly by my son. And I was asked to tell this story, and it takes about 3 minutes, and it is my entire story. You know, so if you got to leave early or you can't stand speaker meeting, I'll tell you my story in about 3 minutes. You know, my son is 23 years old. I'm 26 years sober, so I got more time than him. And when he was 5, he came to live with me, and I was about 7 years sober. And every Saturday morning, he would get up, and I'd get on a phone with a friend of mine, and we'd try to, you know, every Saturday morning, the kids, he had a daughter, and he was in the program, and the kids would be watching these Saturday morning cartoons, you know, and they'd be up early, you know, and we'd be on the phones trying to figure out how to make pancakes or something, you know, and his favorite cartoon back in, I guess this was about, you know, 89, was this Roadrunner cartoon. They would run it real early in the morning. And, you know, it was the one where the guy got a coyote named Wiley. I was just talking to a guy named Wiley. And they got Wiley Coyote, and they got the Roadrunner goes me. You know, I'm sure you've seen it. And we decided that one of us must have written this. Because if you go back far enough, we would start to watch this cartoon with our kids. And we thought, if you go back far enough, you're going to find out that at one point this coyote actually caught a roadrunner, and he ate it, and it fixed him. It was like a spiritual experience, you know. He was irritable, restless, discontented. You know, he didn't feel a part of. He ate this bird, and it was like all was well, you know. I mean, he knew how to get along. He didn't, you know, he felt like a part of. He didn't worry about talking to people. You know, he ate this bird, and it made life great. It was awesome. So now he is going to spend the rest of his life buying Acme rockets, strapping himself on board, lighting the fuse, running himself into the side of mountains, falling 500, breaking every bone in his body on the off chance that he gets one more bite of this Roadrunner. Now, I don't know about you, but that's my story. I mean, there's nothing more to say about it. And, you know, when I was new, I wanted nothing to do with the spirituality of this program. I was angry at God, still am half the time. And I wanted nothing to do with the G word. The best thing I could say about God when I came in here was that it was dog spelled backwards. I didn't want anything to do with the spirituality. So for about 1.5 years, the only part of that book that I could read was the first introductory section. It was called The Doctor's Opinion. And there's a line in there that says, any message that is going to hold the attention of this class of drinker must have depth and weight. I love that, you know. I mean, you want to hold my attention, you better have depth and weight, you know. Well, I found it in a Roadrunner cartoon, you know. And we find it in, you know, the strangest places. But after I had discovered this analogy, let's say, you know, Jimmy and I'd be on the phone, and we keep watching the cartoon. Our kids had gone away, you know. I mean, we didn't think this was for kids anymore, you know. And at the end of every episode, I just, you know, you talk about depth and weight. I mean, I just, this blows me away, because every episode I've gone back and looked ended the same way. And what would happen is that this coyote would be, you know, beat up. He'd have a broken arm, a broken leg, and a cast, black eye, bandage on his head, beat to hell. And he'd be on like one roller skate, you know. And he'd be going after this bird, and the bird would be at the edge of a cliff, and he'd go off the edge of the cliff. And he'd be about to fall. He'd look down at where he's going to go. And right before he falls, he defies gravity for about 2 seconds, looks at the camera, smiles, this huge smile, all beat up, and whips out a sign, and the sign says, "Super Genius." Then he falls to his death. You know, I mean, you can look it up. Now, I thought, my 5-year-old can't even read the word genius, you know, there's a message in that. And what Cubby used to tell me was, he said, you know, when what it does to you outweighs what it does for you, you'll give it up. And, you know, when the pain outweighs the pleasure, I'll change. So, you know, for that coyote to be in that much pain, how much pleasure was there? You know, what it did for me was huge. And, you know, I mean, with my disposition and my perception, you know, I have to have something to deal with this volume knob. You know, I am addicted to a spiritual experience. And for the longest time, that's what drugs and alcohol did for me. And so I have to have that change in perception. Anyway, here's the real story, and or the actual story. I'll try to make it as painless as possible. Like I say, I usually hate speaker meetings, but here it goes. I am from Beaumont, Texas originally. Beaumont is 90 miles east of Houston, and where I'm from in Beaumont is about 4 miles west of the Louisiana state line. Now, the significance of that is I was 14 in 1967. So that makes me 56 years old. You don't have to think about it. And, but in 1967, in the state of Texas, you could get a legal driver's license at the age of 14. They'd let you drive legally. Now, you couldn't drink until you were 21 in Texas. In Louisiana, you could drink at 18, and most people that drove in Louisiana were 18 or over. So if you could drive in Louisiana legally, you know, they didn't even stop and ask you for an ID. They just sell you the booze. And we were 4 miles away from Louisiana. Now, when I was 14, my dad gave me this old 58 Chevy Del Rey. It was his old work car. And because I had a car, I got to hang with guys that were older than me. They were like 16 to 18, and you know, there were 6 of them. There was 1 of me. I was the guy with the car and the driver. And we called ourselves the Magnificent Seven, right? From Beaumont, you know. And what we would do is we'd pile into that car on the weekends, and we'd drive the 4 miles over into Vinton, Louisiana, off Highway 90. And the first thing we come to, first store we come to, was a Jack's packet that said liquor in neon that flashed. And it was this little old white liquor store. And I have never been to a liquor store in the state of Louisiana that didn't have a drive-through window. I swear to God. I mean, it's like a McDonald's or a Jack in the Box, you know. I think it's because of the weather down there. But we would pull into this old oyster shell driveway. We'd pull around back. There was a drive-up window. We'd pull up to it, and this 300-pound guy with no hair on his head and a cigar hanging out of his mouth would say, "What can we do for you?" And we would buy this long neck pearl beer. We'd get Boone's Farm apple wine, Boone's Farm strawberry wine, you know. I mean, that stuff's got to have something going for it, because every time I mention it, you know, people know it, you know. It still sells. And my favorite was for $1.59. You could get a gallon. I mean, that's a lot of wine, you know. A big, huge green gallon bottle of Bally High wine, you know. That was my favorite. It had this little hula girl on the label. I could draw a picture of it. I mean, she was the sexiest thing I'd ever seen, you know. And I was convinced it was a marketing ploy. You drink that whole bottle, that's how you say I'm very high. I'm Bally High, you know. You want to be ballet high, you know? But what it did for me was so significant. That's like a Polaroid in my mind. And there's two things in Texas. There's football and Jesus, in that order. And, you know, everything they had told me about drinking was not true. When I drank that wine, it was only a good thing. It made me feel a part of. It made me feel like I was one of the older crowd. It gave me what I needed to talk to the girls when we went back to the drive-in movie. It was not a bad thing. This was like an amazing, miraculous, spiritual experience. What it did for me was so significant. You know, I can draw you a label of Ballet High wine, you know. And I look back, now I gotta tell you, if you're new, what I'm saying about this is hindsight. You know, you wanna know how I'm doing today, ask me next week, you know, because I'm still unable to get completely objective, but I can look back on, what, 40 years? And with hindsight, I can tell you pretty accurately what was going on. So, you know, and especially I can look back on the 26 years of my sobriety and see what has happened since I got to this fellowship. And so, you know, I haven't always been that clear. You know, it takes me a while to get objective. But, yeah, ask me next week. That's pretty good. Anyway, so we would buy this booze. There'd be 7 guys in this car. We'd have enough money to get one guy's admission into Showtown USA Drive-In. And if you were in '67 back then, we were scared to stay in Louisiana. I mean, Louisiana people disappeared there, you know. So we would drive back over the border to Texas. We would go to Showtown USA Drive-In movie theater. We'd put 6 guys in the trunk of this car, you know, so the rear end's dragging on the ground. Here's this one 14-year-old kid pulling up to a ticket booth with all this booze in the back seat. And that was and we'd have enough money to get one guy admission. And that was my summer of love, you know. That's where it began. And that's where I figured out how to be an adult, how you were able to live this life and negotiate. And it was with this booze, this pot we were smoking, and this drugs and alcohol that allowed me to stay on the planet. Saved my life, saved your life when you were around me. You know, it did a lot for me. And, you know, I've had to, you know, acknowledge that. Now, the thing is it starts to work real well, and then over the years, like Andrew said in his talk, you know, it starts to dwindle. I couldn't handle Texas. When I was 18, I ran away. I took a job driving cab in New York City. I worked for Bell Garage in South Bronx. By the time I was 21, my dad died. Now, I hadn't talked to him for 2 years. I had an older sister that was like the valedictorian of the high school, and my family was very, you know, I did not relate to these people. I thought I was an accident. They seemed like strangers to me, and they were, you know, very Texan, you know, whatever, I don't know. But I could not relate, but I hadn't planned on not talking to my father for the rest of his life, and he died when I was 21. I went home, buried him, started a little bit of a relationship with my sister, who had a 2-year-old son. And when I was 25, she was 31. She was on a Fulbright scholarship to the University of Cologne in Germany. And she had been, like I say, the valedictorian. I mean, she had gone right down the straight path. And my mom was, she was a churchgoer, and, they still wonder what the hell happened to me. But she got a type C hepatitis before they knew what it was. She was in Germany with her 2-year-old son, my nephew, who was the only member of the family that would talk to me at that time. And she had an aneurysm and went into a coma. And I went home and I held her son while my mom took her off life support, and I swore off God. I figured if there was a God, I was the one that was supposed to be dead, not her. This made no sense to me. And I started to chase the Roadrunner with a vengeance, By 1980, I have a great trick. I was a blackout drinker by then. I would drink like on a Tuesday, and the next thing I know, it'd be the weekend. I had a great trick that if you're a blackout drinker, you plan on going back out. This sounds kind of funny now, but it was a very serious piece of information for me back then. For free, the top 2 inches of a newspaper will tell you everything you need to know. If you're a blackout drinker, it'll tell you what day it is and where you are, And I came out of a blackout once in downtown Scottsdale, have not a clue how I got there, and did not know where I was, did not recognize anything. It was about 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Anyway, that was much later on. What happened was I was coming out of a blackout. It was 1980 when blackout started, and I knew where I was. I was in the middle of Madison Avenue, so there was no doubt about that, but I didn't have a clue what day it was. And I went over to a newsstand, and it was a Sunday, and they had the New York Times Sunday edition out on the newsstand. And this was back when they first started running color pictures on the front page of the Times, and it had a picture of the comedian Richard Pryor running down some street in the valley on fire, and I thought, what's he doing, And if you're Wile E. Coyote, this looks like a great idea, So I thought, I'm gonna check this out, and I got a job in LA, making a lot of money in a little bit of time, and I moved out here. By 1982, it was a week before Thanksgiving. A buddy of mine was coming over. He was we were getting ready to go to a party. It was the first of many holiday parties. I remember it was a Thursday because it was exactly a week before Thanksgiving. And the party wasn't until that night, but you couldn't go to a party conscious, You had to get ready to go to the party. So he was bringing something to smoke, and I was going to provide the booze. I was living with a girlfriend who was out of town, and all she had to drink was this bottle of gin. She had a bottle of Tanqueray in her cabinet. And I hated gin, made me sick. But you got to get ready to go to the party, So I took these 2 water glasses down. I remember pouring them full of gin. That was the last thing I remember. It was about 3 in the afternoon. It was a Thursday. And the next thing I know, it is Monday morning. I am coming to on the southeast corner of Hollywood and Vine. People are walking over me, looking at me like I used to look at the bums on the subway. I have a scar on my hand to this day where it was stuck to the sidewalk. I had holes in my jeans. It was not a fashion statement in '82 to wear holes in your jeans, I had blood on my knees, blood on my face, and it was like I didn't know it at the time. But the jig was up, What it had done to me outweighed anything it did for me. And I couldn't even remember getting loaded anymore. I would black out before I get the click. And I didn't know how to stay on the planet without that click. I lived for that switch, Anyway, I'm looking around. I had this old denim jacket on. And like I say, there are people, walking over me and looking at me. And I was like a dog on a freeway, I was terrified. And there was a payphone hanging there. And I reached in my pockets. I had this old denim jacket. And I was looking for money. And I found 37 cents. and a piece of torn off legal pad. It was a corner of a yellow piece of paper, and had a very distinctive handwriting on it. It said Michael with the phone number. Now I remembered this guy because of the way he would write his name. And I used to drink with this guy. I bartended with him years before in New York. And I could vaguely remember 2 or 3 months earlier seeing him at a party at a bar. And he had been drinking this Perrier. And I walked up to him, I said, "Let me buy you a drink. You don't have to drink a Perrier." He said, "No, I hadn't had a drink in a year and a half." I said, "That's terrible, man, you know. Who would do that to themselves, you know? Let me buy you a drink." He said, "No, I've been going to AA." Well, that was the end of that conversation that night. But in my blackout that night, he had slipped me this phone number, and I don't remember it to this day, but I found it in my pocket that morning. There was a payphone hanging there. I took that quarter, I called him. He picked up the phone. He right away recognized who I was. He said, "What's up?" And I heard myself say to him, you know, I said, "Michael, I really need a drink right now. I need something. I need a drink, but I don't want to get drunk today. I don't want to forget today." And I heard myself say that, and I thought, maybe I got a problem. You know, we're like the last to find out, you know. And he said, "Where are you?" And I told him, figured it out. And what must have been about 20 minutes, but it felt like 2 minutes to me, he comes tooling up in his car. It was a Monday morning, and he was taking me, it was about 11:30 by then. He took me in my first AA meeting. I knew nothing about this. It was an architects meeting at noon in West Hollywood. Now, I knew nothing about this deal. You know, I had had an uncle when I was a kid that went to AA, and I thought it was about learning how to drink again. I mean, you know, the guy would go for 90 days, the family would get back together, he'd start drinking again, everything seemed fine, and then 6 months later he'd go back to AA. And it was like, that's where he learned how to drink again. I didn't know anything about this deal. And I was not in, you know, I mean, how do you approach a dog on a freeway? I was terrified that morning when he took me in my first meeting. But if you want to get a lot of attention in AA meetings, show up looking like a newcomer, you know? Because when I walked in there, I was convinced everybody must have known my friend Michael, because they all came over and said hi to him. I thought he was president of the group or something, you know? They said, "He sits here, it's great to meet you." And you know, when you're a dog I mean, like, how would you approach a dog on a freeway? When you're in that kind of terror, you know, in that state of mind, I remember, you know, I don't remember the specifics of what was said. I can't tell you who spoke. I can't tell you I can tell you who had the coffee commitment, because I ended up getting to know that guy. But the point is I remember the experience. I looked these people in the eye, and I was terrified, and they were saying things to me like, "Nice to meet you. We're glad you're here." I lived in a very hostile world, and I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, you know? There was this one guy asked me what I wanted in my coffee. He sounded like he was from Brooklyn. I told him light, no sugar. And he seemed to recognize it. When he came back with the coffee, I told my friend Michael, he still kisses me to this day, I said, "Can you spot me a cup of coffee? You know, I spent my last quarter calling you." He said, "It's for free." I was very impressed, you know. I mean, I gotta tell you, I knew nothing about this deal. Anyway, when that meeting was over, there was a guy with a three-piece suit. His name was Bob Burke, had a carnation in his lapel, didn't look like the kind of guy that would have anything to do with me. He comes running from the back of the room and he says, "Michael, I want to meet your friend Frank." I thought the guy was a narc, you know. I thought, okay, now they're dropping the other shoe. This is why he brought me here. I was terrified. He comes running up. He says, "My name's Bob." I said, "So?" And he said, "Nice to meet you." He said, "I'm a friend of your friend Michael's. I just wanted to say welcome. Do you know when your next meeting is?" I said, "There are others." I didn't know anything about this deal. He says, "Yeah, there's one tonight at 7:30. It's the old Chicago group. It was on Santa Monica and Camden. He said, I'm going to be there. Michael's going to be there. It's about 2 in the afternoon now. We'll see you there tonight. What I have? Plans? I didn't have any. So I thought, sure, He's walking away, and right before he walks away, it's like he forgot something. He snaps his fingers. He says, are you going to drink? He says, about 2 in the afternoon now. He says, are you going to drink between now and 7 tonight? He asked me this. I guess I took too long answering this question, because what he did was he went over and got about 4 or 5 guys I'd never met before in my life, took me out to a booth in Figaro Coffee Shop. They set me on the inside of the booth. They sat on the outside, and there was a sentinel that went on for the next 3 hours. Some other guy would walk in I'd never met. They bought me coffee and fed me cigarettes until 7 o'clock that night. And they explained to me that you never leave a meeting without knowing when your next meeting is, when and where. And you know what? It's a funny thing. That's all I've done here. The steps have had to, I've gotten in such pain, I've had to learn to read the book. I've had to work these steps, but it started with that. And as bizarre as it sounds, they would try to tell me that morning that everything was going to be okay. They didn't know what my problems were. I had, I was in thousands of dollars worth of debt to the wrong kind of people. The only thing I had done all my whole life was deal drugs and bartend. I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't find my car. It took me 6 months to find my car. I still had a car. How some people lose the keys? I lost the car. And my girlfriend had the keys. So even if I found it, I couldn't drive it because she wouldn't pick up the phone. I was a mess, And they told me that all of that would clear up. And it just seems bizarre. But I'm here to tell you, if you're a newcomer, and that if you can just trust that. It started with that. I never left a meeting without knowing when and where my next meeting was. I got 2 minutes. Okay, I'm going to try and tell this in 2 minutes. And I can jam it real quick. Actually, no. You can go for it? Okay. If you're new, I like to tell this story because let me tell you, I wanted nothing to do with the spirituality or the God part of this. It took me 1.5 years to get over that. It took me 2 years to read beyond the doctor's opinion. But it didn't take me that long for the steps to work me. The steps worked me at 90 days. It was with hindsight that I didn't even realize it. I took a 3rd step when I was 90 days sober and I didn't even know it. And it wasn't even directly from the book. It was from my experience of showing up at meetings. And with hindsight, I was able to see this. I had 90 days and I hadn't taken any chips and I wasn't participating. And a buddy of mine said, you gotta go take a chip for 90 days because that's a long time. I mean, if you got 90 days, that's a long time, And he said, you got to go take a chip. It's for the newcomer. So I thought, okay, I'm going to try this. And there was one meeting at noon that gave chips. It was a Yucca meeting, Yucca and Gower. There was a guy with over 30 years sobriety. He used to go every week. His name was Irv Nemi. He died in '89. I knew guys that knew Irv. Irv got sober with Jesus or something, it was like, I didn't even believe anybody could have over 30 years, So I had never talked to Irv, but I knew who he was. And I got there early to save his seat. It was a huge meeting. Irv's walking one way, I'm walking the other. He says, hey, how you doing? And he stops and there's nobody around and he actually wants to know how I'm doing. I said, that's amazing. I might as well be like God asking me how I'm doing. So I thought I got to tell this guy the truth. So I said, I'm pathetic. He said, excuse me? I said, yeah, I got these 90 days. Nothing's getting any better. I'm coming to these stupid meetings. I'm sleeping on my friend's couch. I've lost everything, and, like I say, I lost my car. I don't have a job. I'm in thousands of dollars worth of debt, wrong kind of people, and I am pathetic. My rear end's falling off, How are you? And it's like, Irv's not even listening to this sob story, and it was a great one. And it's like, he looks in the back of the room, he says, that guy back there, his name's Jeff. And I said, no, and he says, well, he's got about 2 minutes. And I look back there, and Jeff had a stack of ashtrays about 2 feet high. This is back when people smoked in meetings. And Irv said he's got about 2 minutes to put all them ashtrays out. You know, and why don't you go give him a hand? Now, let's think, you know, this is my, I tell this guy my rear end's falling off. He's telling me to go put out ashtrays. You know, by now people are standing around listening to this. I'm embarrassed. You know, you embarrass me with 90 days, I'll kill you, you know. I mean, I wanted to reach out and touch Irv, you know, and I was, you know, very, you know, I didn't know what to do. I was trapped. What I wanted to do was run, and if these people are looking at me, and I was forced into taking an opposite action. Had no idea at the time. I just know I had to go back to that guy, and I said, where are these stupid ashtrays? I'm supposed to help you with them. He says, they're back in the kitchen. I went back in the kitchen. There's a guy back there with an army jacket on. He's got a Duncan butterfly yo-yo. Now, when I was 10 years old in Beaumont, Texas, I won a Briggs & Stratton mini bike doing a yo-yo trick called Walk the Dog further than any other kid in my age group. And I hadn't seen a yo-yo in 20 years. And this guy in the kitchen, he couldn't even make it go up and down. That'll break your heart, you know? So I walked over to him and I said, where'd you get a Duncan, man? I haven't seen one of these in forever. You can't even work this thing. Let me show you this. We went out in the courtyard. I'm doing around the worlds and rock the cradle and walk the dog, doing all these yo-yo tricks. He's going, that's amazing. He says, my name's Bill. I said, I'm Frank. He said, how you doing? I said, well, I'm glad you asked me, you know? I'm doing pathetic. I'm supposed to take a chip, and do you know Irv? He says, everybody knows Irv. I said, these old timers don't care. Make a long story short, the guy gives me his business card. I called him that afternoon. I went to work for him the next day. I met my business partner that has led me to a career that has raised my son and fed my face for 25 years. It took me getting a year cake at that meeting for the guy with the yo-yo to nudge me and say, you realize we would have never met if you hadn't gone to put out them ashtrays. Now, what did Irv know? You know, how'd that work? It took me 2 years to look back on it and realize the miracle of this thing and that the steps had worked me. And the bottom line was that Irv knew if I took the actions of someone who was fixed, you know, and just showed up and kept it simple, you know, these steps would work me too. And they have. And I can't tell you enough about it. I mean, it's just a debt I'll never pay back. I'm in love with this program. I'm in love with you guys. Thank you for my life. I had a great time.
Okay, great. I'd like to thank whoever read chapter 5. Who read chapter? Anthony. Anthony read chapter 5. Thank you. And I'd like to thank Cade for reading the 12 traditions. And thank you for coming to the Friday night Rodeo meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Doors open at 7 p.m.
Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.